the car industry's got many examples of that. And so anyway, this patent for the decorticator was essentially bought, and George died not really even knowing, I think, what was going on, although he may have suspected at the end. Anyway, this newspaper company essentially went to their friends, the Hearst newspaper company, and William Hearst had just heavily invested in timber. You may as well skip ahead, see what the hell else I got going on here. There it is, the decorticator. So yeah, like the stuff would come in and get all ground up and stuff, and that's part of the patent. Anyway, flip ahead, see what it says. So reefer madness came up. William Hearst invented the term marijuana. It never had existed before. You know, there's all sorts of drugs and plants and things that people were, you know, sort of discovering at the time, right? So for, you know, the Hearst newspaper chain to come out and say, oh, there's this marijuana plant that's from Mexico that's making people go a little nuts. Well, that didn't seem outrageous. You know, there's indigenous people smoking all sorts of things and stuff like that. So, you know, back then it seemed quite reasonable to think that the Mexicans had such a plant, that was why they were so nuts sometimes, and that, yeah, it should be a problem. Our children should be protected from it. Like, you know, some of the literature is just outrageous when you read. There's one quote from like the chief of police of LA talking about how it turns young people into murderers and all this kind of crazy stuff. Anyway, the newspaper company wasn't alone. Newspaper wasn't easy to produce at the time. Lots of chemicals used in the production of pulp, right? You gotta, you know, mash up the trees, and then there's the ink and printing and stuff. Cotton farmers, again, heavy users of chemicals. Chemicals were also important in the fledgling pharmaceutical companies at the time, right? Trying to get the drugs out of the plants, which is still an ongoing problem, I would say, with the way we look at medicine. But anyway, the drug companies, the chemical companies like DuPont Chemical were really critical in the Marijuana Tax Act and the elimination of hemp at the time anyway, because not only, you know, well, there's a multitude of industries that they were invested in. Oh, now I'm failing because I bragged that I knew everything. I don't need to research. I'm wrong. Andrew Mellon is an important figure who isn't very well known in this. Andrew Mellon was a banker at the time in the, you know, like 1810 sort of thing, let's say, or even at the turn of the century, I'm sure, now that I think of his age. So he got into the chemical companies and was a banker, so he basically almost founded DuPont Chemicals, founded Gulf Oil. Andrew Mellon was, in the early 1920s, the richest man in North America. He became the Secretary-Treasurer of the United States, essentially deciding what the government would buy, who they would invest in, who got money for research. He held the Treasury for a long time, and it was seen as a good thing. The richest guy in the country was in charge of our bank in the 1920s. It was the raging 20s. They were doing all sorts of stuff, believing in, you know, these new age products, and plastics were coming out. People were being amazed at all these new things that were coming out all the time. It was just really a very exciting time, I think, for sure. One of the other things that Andrew Mellon had to deal with was his I guess, nephew-in-law. This guy married into the family, right? So you can imagine Andrew Mellon, banker, wealthy guy, getting all this stuff going. And this loudmouth schmuck gets into the family. So he's got to find a job for this loudmouth schmuck that he doesn't really like. Doesn't want to deal with the family business or anything like that. So alcohol prohibition was failing. Part of the reason that alcohol prohibition was tried in the first place was because they were making fuel, the farmers that is. They were becoming self-sufficient. They could make, like they are nowadays, you know, biofuel. It doesn't take that much effort and hard. It's ethanol, it's a little distilling process, but they made distilling illegal. So suddenly farmers had to use fossil fuels. There was a huge debate as well, you know, fossil fuels, vegetable fuels. The diesel engine was made for vegetable fuel oil. And so, you know, there was a real, you know, dilemma at the time between these car manufacturers. You know, do we go with vegetable fuel oil or do we go with fossil fuels, right? And they had to go with one or the other eventually because some machines worked off one, some worked off the other. It was very inconsistent. And so by making out, you know, the distillation process is illegal entirely, it was making things simpler for them. But a lot of people switched over to vegetable seed crops because hemp seed oil can be poured into a diesel engine and used with very little modification at all. What it was made for in the first place, really. Anyway, so you got, the chemical companies, the automobile factories, you got these new drug companies coming in, knowing that cannabis is also being used for all these medicines and stuff, and they prefer to sell pills and things. But really the pharmaceutical companies at the time weren't as big a factor as this whole other conglomerate. Anyway, Andrew Mellon, with this little dilemma is like, okay, well, what do? We want to get rid of hemp. Well, let's make marijuana illegal. Let's get my jerk nephew, Harry Anslinger, a job and give him what has become the DEA. He was in charge of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics for like 45 friggin' years. The guy just wouldn't die. And he was a horrible influence on the entire planet because he went around and coerced other places around the world to enact legislation, making all sorts of plants illegal that he had no right business doing. He was very much behind that. But and then somewhere around like 1916 or something were the first rules that came in limiting the use of cannabis in any way. They were sort of awkward fines at times that grew. I think the state of California might have even beat Texas. There's different historians that have varying opinions on that. But regardless, state by state, I think there were up to like 13 of them at one point before the entire nation went for it. But by 1937, when the Marijuana Tax Act in the U.S. was finally passed, most people didn't know much about hemp at all. The only people by 1937 that used hemp products in any way, shape, or form, because like I say, Fortune 500 is like, no, this plant's got to go. It's competition. We don't want it. We're not going to buy it. We're not going to have a hemp seed in any of our products in any way, shape, or form. No hemp fiber, nothing. Poultry farmers still used it, and to this day, I believe a lot of seeds have hemp seed in it. If you ever feed your egg, pardon? Canaries will not sing without hemp seed. Oh, that's okay. I sort of heard that before. The hemp seed is very good for egg production with birds for sure. So the poultry farmers were opposed to it. The American Medical Association found out like last minute that this Marijuana Tax Act meant that, I think it was only $1 an ounce at the time or something like that, but for cannabis the tax wasn't that, was fairly huge relatively speaking. I think but for hemp, that just basically made it impossible to grow hemp at that point, sort of great. It was something that the American Medical Association stood up and denounced these laws as too fast, too soon. There's medicinal value. I believe there was doctors using it for glaucoma, giving it to patients with that condition until the 1950s throughout the United States, because there's just nothing else they could do. People were going blind, and doctors were like, well, there is this plant that I have in the back room. I'll give you some of that so you don't go blind. But even in the 1950s, that was eventually eliminated. So it was made illegal here in Canada in 1923. Emily Murphy is our version of Harry Anslinger, although she just came out of nowhere. She's a really, in some ways, interesting Canadian figurehead. She's a very renowned judge of her day. She's like the first female judge in the British magistrate, I understand. She had very racist opinions and thought idiots like me should be sterilized and all sorts of things that really weren't or wouldn't be accepted in this day and age. But in her day, some of these opinions were quite acceptable, and otherwise she did do a lot for women in her day. But the campaign, somewhere buried in her book, The Black Candle, she wrote a series of articles in Maclean's magazine that got published into a book, The Black Candle. It quoted stories from this chief of police in LA that said people were murdering after smoking, and all this other stuff that, as we know, is simply just not true. So so by 1937, most people didn't know about hemp very much at all, certainly didn't care very much at all. Well, the other big one that I missed, the other big industry that was right behind it was the cotton farmers. They not only saw it as competition. Here, let's start flashing, James. But they also really hated the fact that people of color were free And they knew that this was something they used. In fact, on a lot of plantations, apparently, they would allow their slaves to grow and use cannabis freely. They wouldn't let them touch alcohol at all. But they were working all day and night, and I guess the main thing that kept them happy and healthy in any sense at all, if they were, would have been the fact that they got to smoke and eat and use cannabis all the time. And they were singing a lot of songs about cannabis in the fields and stuff like that too. But they had a real hate-on for the fact that people of color were free, and coming back on them with these laws and getting the police after them is much akin to the opium laws that happen with Asian people. But anyway, this gives you a sense of all the stuff hemp's good for. I haven't really hugged my hemp insulation yet, but this is hemp insulation from Nepal. I have the hemp fiber board here. I have hemp stain. In a couple of weeks, Bill Finley's going to be here talking about all the different things that you can make and use and grow with hemp. Today, everything I'm wearing, my underwear, socks, shoes. Oh wait, I didn't wear my hemp tie. Yeah. Oh wait, this isn't even one of my hemp shirts. Oh, now I'm embarrassed. I have all that stuff, but I'll wear it in 2 weeks when Bill's here. I think the lecture next week is Cannabis Around the World. And there's lots of things to talk about that are happening and ongoing events in the United States as well. So that'll be an exciting lecture. There's Andrew Mellon, the richest man in America, who basically was behind this whole damn thing. Anyway, keep going. Oh wait.
That's the one, the industry's threatened by hemp.
Yeah, if you just kind of like look around there, you can see that at the almost 90% of the industries in the United States back in 1920 would have felt in some way, shape, or form threatened by hemp. And if farmers could grow their own food, fuel, produce fiber with the excess, because you could just press the seed on your own farm, use the oil for fuel, for electricity, your vehicles, the leftover mash you could feed your animals, the leftover fiber you could sell or make into things yourself if you want to. So those industries were all threatened by it. There's all sorts of movies, Reefer Madness stuff that happen later. There's Harry Anslinger, damn him all. There's some really wild stuff, like assassins of youth marijuana pictures and things like that. And then, there's a little time period where the United States government was promoting growing hemp during the Second World War because they really needed it, and it was promoted as the first agricultural crop that could be worth $1 billion a year. This is even like this came out in Popular Mechanics the year after it was made illegal. That's right, because the farmers didn't, and people in Popular Mechanics didn't realize this Marijuana Tax Act had much to do with hemp at all, and they were hoping to have a revival of the hemp industry, not realizing the effect of the Marijuana Tax Act laws. So yeah, it was promoted as a new $1 billion crop, and that never happened. And then, was it Hemp Save the War? No.
Hemp for Victory.
Hemp for Victory was the campaign during the Second World War. That's right. Anyway, I could go on about hemp forever. Sorry we got a little bit delayed. I'll try not to let that happen much more. But it's so exciting to be back in teaching. Thank you, everybody. And if you think you're going to be coming to all the lectures or just want to sign up, we have a sign-up sheet. We give certificates each semester to people that make pretty much, most of the lectures. You get 1 or 2 forgiven and can still get a certificate. But if you're interested in doing that, please let us know. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. Have a great day, and smoke when you're done.
Hey, Ted. Can I say something that somebody said on here?
What's that?
The ones that have been coming for the last 5 years said that you've really built your confidence in doing the classes, that they've noticed how you just now become second natural and like your home.
Cool.